Richard Newman was 34 years old when he watched his wife stand silently while her family humiliated the man who raised him. The man they dismissed as a poor old fool in his threadbare cardigan had more money in his checking account than all of them would earn in 3 lifetimes combined. But Richard couldn't tell them that. His father had made him promise years ago, and Richard had kept that promise, even as he watched his marriage crumble around it. It started on a Saturday evening in late November 2024. At the annual Harrison family gathering in the sprawling suburban home of Richard's in-laws in Westchester County. Richard worked as a mid-level systems analyst at a tech firm, pulling in a respectable $78,000 a year. His wife Tracy came from money, old money. The kind that came with expectations, judgment, and an unshakable belief that wealth equaled worth. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across 3 states. Her brother Tyler ran a successful real estate development company. Her mother, Patricia, had never worked a day in her life, but possessed a PhD in making others feel small. Richard's father, James Newman, had raised him alone after his mother passed when Richard was 7. James had worked as a custodian at a private school for 30 years, living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, driving the same 1,998 Honda Civic until it finally died last year. He wore discount store clothes, clipped coupons, and never missed a single one of Richard's school events. He'd saved every penny to put Richard through college, refusing to let his son take out loans. What the Harrison family didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that James Newman was worth approximately $847 million. The money had come from an early investment in a tech startup back in 1997. James had been working nights cleaning offices in Silicon Valley during a brief period when he'd moved west looking for better opportunities. A young entrepreneur named David Park had been working late one night, and James had struck up a conversation with him. David had explained his idea, something about improving internet search algorithms. James had listened, asked thoughtful questions, and when David mentioned he was looking for investors, James had done something completely out of character. He'd invested $15,000, nearly everything he'd saved at that point. David Park's company had eventually been acquired by Google. James's shares had multiplied beyond comprehension. But James Newman had never changed his lifestyle. He'd moved back to New York, continued his custodian job until retirement, and lived simply. The money sat in carefully managed accounts, growing quietly. Money changes people, he told Richard when he finally revealed the truth on Richard's 25th birthday. And not usually for the better. I've watched it happen. People who win the lottery, people who inherit wealth, they lose themselves. They lose their friends. They forget what matters. Promise me, son. Promise me you'll never tell anyone, not until I'm gone. Let people know me for who I am, not what I have. Richard had promised. Even when he'd married Tracy 3 years ago, he'd kept the secret. It hadn't seemed necessary to share it. Tracy's family had already looked down on James, making comments about his humble circumstances and wondering aloud why Richard didn't help his father live better. Richard had gritted his teeth through countless awkward dinners, watching his father handle their condescension with quiet dignity. But tonight was different. Tonight, Patricia Harrison had crossed a line. The evening had started typically enough. The Harrison home was decorated within an inch of its life, professionally done, of course, with a fall theme that probably cost more than Richard's monthly mortgage payment. About 30 family members and close friends had gathered, most of them dressed in designer casual wear that screamed wealth without saying it outright. Richard had arrived with Tracy and his father, who wore his usual outfit. Clean khaki pants, a simple button-down shirt, and that familiar gray cardigan with the stretched-out pockets. "Oh, James," Patricia had said when they arrived, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "I'm so glad you could make it. We have plenty of food, so don't be shy about eating your fill. I know times are tough." James had simply smiled. "Thank you, Patricia. You have a lovely home." Richard had felt Tracy tense beside him, but say nothing. That had been the first warning sign. The second came an hour later, when Tyler Harrison cornered Richard near the bar. Tyler was 36, with the kind of aggressive confidence that came from never being told no. He'd just closed a deal on a luxury condo development downtown and wasn't shy about letting everyone know. "So, Richard," Tyler said, swirling his top-shelf bourbon, "still grinding away at that tech support job?" "Systems analysis," Richard corrected quietly. "And yes, right." "Right," Tyler smirked. "Tracy mentioned you guys are looking at houses. Might want to check out some of our more affordable developments. I mean, on your salary." He trailed off meaningfully. "Actually, you know what? Maybe focus on something further out in the suburbs. Better bang for your buck." Richard had learned to let these comments slide. Tyler had been making variations of this speech for 3 years. What bothered him more was the way Tracy stood beside him, scrolling through her phone, not defending him, not saying anything. "We're doing fine," Richard said evenly. Sure. Although, Tyler glanced across the room to where James sat in a corner chair, quietly reading a book he'd brought. "Might be easier if you didn't have to worry about supporting your old man too. I mean, at his age, still living in that neighborhood." "My father doesn't need my support," Richard said, his voice tight. "Come on, man. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Lots of people have parents who struggled to make ends meet. It's admirable that you help him out, but you gotta think about your future too. Tracy deserves a certain lifestyle, you know? If you enjoy stories of sweet revenge, shocking family secrets, and justice against the wealthy, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one, and tell me where you are watching from." Richard excused himself and walked away before he said something he'd regret. He found his father still reading peacefully, completely unbothered by the noise and chaos around him. At 71, James moved a bit slower than he used to, but his mind was sharp as ever. He looked up and smiled when Richard approached. "You okay, son?" James asked quietly. "I should be asking you that," Richard said, sitting in the chair beside him. "Are they treating you all right?" James chuckled. "Patricia offered me leftovers to take home 3 times already. She's quite insistent." Richard felt his jaw clench. "Dad, I could tell them. I could end this right now." "No," James said firmly. "We had a deal. And besides, their behavior tells me everything I need to know about their character. Why would I want their respect if it only comes from my bank account?" Richard couldn't argue with that logic, but it didn't make watching it any easier. The real explosion came during dinner. Patricia had arranged for a catered meal, served on china that probably cost more per plate than James's monthly rent. The long dining table seated 20. And through some careful maneuvering, Patricia had placed James at the far end, physically separated from the main conversations. Richard noticed immediately and tried to move seats, but Tracy had grabbed his arm. "Just leave it," she'd whispered. "Don't make a scene." That was when Richard first felt something inside him shift. Don't make a scene? As if standing up for his father would be the problem, not the casual cruelty being displayed. Halfway through dinner, Patricia's friend Diane had asked about everyone's holiday plans. The conversation went around the table: ski trips to Aspen, a Mediterranean cruise, a villa rental in Tuscany. When it reached James, who hadn't been paying attention, Patricia spoke up. "Oh, James probably doesn't have any plans. Do you, James?" Her voice carried down the table. "I suppose you'll just have a quiet holiday at home?" James looked up, his expression mild. "Actually, I'm thinking of visiting some old friends in California." "How nice," Patricia said. "Bus travel can be very affordable this time of year." Several people laughed. Richard felt his hands ball into fists under the table. "I'll probably fly," James said calmly, returning to his meal. "Well, hopefully not too expensive. I know Richard works hard to help you out." Patricia turned to Richard, her smile sharp. "It's very generous of you, dear. Not every child is so devoted to a parent who didn't exactly build a nest egg for retirement." The implication was clear. James had failed to provide for himself and was now Richard's burden. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Tracy beat him to it. "Actually," Tracy said, and Richard's heart lifted for a moment, thinking she was finally going to defend James. Richard is incredibly generous with his money. Sometimes too generous. We've talked about the importance of saving for our own future. The table went quiet for a beat. Then Patricia beamed. Exactly. Tracy understands. You're a smart girl. She looked at James again. No offense, James, but young couples need to think about their own lives. Children are expensive. Houses are expensive. Maybe it's time to be a little less dependent? James set down his fork carefully. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. I've never asked Richard for a single dollar. Not for rent, not for food, not for anything. I've supported myself my entire life. Of course, Patricia said dismissively. But surely Richard helps with things here and there. It's only natural. Although, she paused dramatically, I do worry about Tracy's future. Richard is a lovely young man, but he's not exactly in a position to provide the lifestyle Tracy grew up with. Add in supporting a parent. And, well, she shrugged delicately. That was when Tyler joined in, because of course he did. No shame in it. Richard, Tyler said loudly. But Mom has a point. If you're serious about building wealth, you gotta make tough choices. Can't be supporting everyone forever. Sometimes you gotta focus on your own family first. He raised his glass. To smart financial decisions. Several people clinked glasses. Tracy didn't stop them. She sat there, staring at her plate, silent. Richard felt something break inside him. Not suddenly, but like a rope that had been fraying for months finally snapping. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw someone he didn't recognize. When had she become this person? When had she started valuing her family's opinion over basic human decency? He pushed back his chair and stood up. The table fell silent. We're leaving, Richard said quietly. Richard, Tracy started. Dad, we're going. Richard looked at his father, who was already starting to stand, his expression unreadable. Sit down, Tracy hissed. You're embarrassing me. I'm embarrassing you? Richard stared at her. Your mother just insulted my father to his face, and you said nothing. Your brother implied he's a financial burden, and you said nothing. You agreed with them. I didn't. Tracy's face flushed. I was just being realistic. We do need to save money. We can't. Can't what? Can't help my father who never asked for help? Can't show basic respect to the man who raised me? Richard's voice was rising now, and he didn't care. You sat there and let them mock him. Patricia stood up, her face pinched. Now, see here. Young man, there's no need for dramatics. We were simply having an honest family conversation about finances. If you can't handle honest, Richard laughed. But there was no humor in it. You want honest? Fine. My father has more money than everyone in this room combined. Significantly more. He could buy your dealerships in cash and not notice the expense. He could purchase Tyler's entire company before dessert and still have enough left over to retire everyone at this table for life. The silence was absolute. James touched Richard's arm. Son, he said quietly, let's just go. But Richard couldn't stop. 3 years of condescension, of watching them treat his father like a charity case, of Tracy's increasing embarrassment about James's simple lifestyle, it all came pouring out. He invested in a startup in 1997, Richard continued. It was acquired by Google. He's worth over $800 million. He lives in a small apartment and drives a used car because that's who he is. Not because he has to, because he chooses to. Because unlike everyone here, he knows that wealth doesn't define worth. Patricia's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. Tyler had gone pale. Tracy was staring at Richard with an expression he couldn't quite read. Shock, maybe, or anger that he'd revealed the secret. You're lying, Patricia finally said. That's ridiculous. If he had that kind of money, why would he live like a normal person? Richard finished. Because he is a normal person. The money didn't change that. He still clips coupons because it's a habit. He still wears old clothes because they're comfortable. He still takes the subway because it's efficient. He doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. James was tugging at Richard's arm now, more insistently. "Richard, please. Let's go." But Richard pulled away. "No, Dad. I'm tired of watching them treat you like this. I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter." He looked at Tracy, who was standing now, her face white. "And I'm especially tired of my own wife being ashamed of you." "I'm not," Tracy started. But her voice cracked. "Richard, you promised him you wouldn't tell anyone, and you promised to love and honor me," Richard shot back. "That includes my family. My father is the best man I've ever known. He taught me about integrity, about humility, about what really matters in life. And you know what? If you can't see that, if all you and your family can see is dollar signs or the lack of them, then maybe we need to have a very different conversation about our future." He turned to his father. "Come on, Dad, let's go." This time, James didn't argue. They walked toward the door together, leaving a stunned, silent room behind them. Richard grabbed their coats from the hall closet. As they reached the front door, Tracy came running after them. "Richard, wait. Please. Can we just talk about this?" Richard turned to look at her. In that moment, standing in her parents' grand foyer, she looked like a stranger. "What's there to talk about, Tracy? You made your choice. You sat there and said nothing while they humiliated him. Worse, you agreed with them. You think he's a burden. You've been thinking it for a while, haven't you? That's why you've been suggesting we see him less. That's why you suddenly can't make it to our Sunday dinners with him." "That's not fair," Tracy said, tears forming in her eyes. "I was trying to be practical. Your father doesn't seem to care about money, and I thought..." "You thought what? That we should cut him out because he doesn't fit your family's standards? Because he might embarrass you at country club functions?" "No. I just..." Tracy looked back toward the dining room, where Richard could see faces pressed toward the doorway. "Everyone listening," she lowered her voice. "I just wanted to fit in. My family has expectations, and you were never going to make partner-level money. And I thought..." "There it is," Richard said quietly. "You thought I wasn't good enough. And by extension, neither was my father." "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean, Tracy? Because from where I'm standing, you just told me that my salary isn't enough, that my father's lifestyle embarrasses you, and that your family's approval matters more than my feelings." Tracy reached for him, but Richard stepped back. "We'll talk later, when you've decided what's actually important to you." They left her standing there, tears streaming down her face as they walked out into the cold November night. In the car, Richard's modest sedan father and son sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, James spoke. "You broke your promise," he said. But his tone wasn't angry, just sad. "I know," Richard said, gripping the steering wheel. "I'm sorry, Dad. I just couldn't take it anymore. Watching them treat you that way. Watching Tracy say nothing. She's your wife, son. This is going to cause problems." "We already had problems," Richard said quietly. "I just didn't want to see them." James was quiet for a moment. Then he reached over and squeezed Richard's shoulder. "What you said in there about me being the best man you've ever known, did you mean that?" "Every word," Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. "Then you understand why I live the way I do, why the money doesn't matter?" "I do, I always have." "Good." James settled back in his seat. "Then, whatever happens next, you'll handle it the right way, with integrity. That's worth more than all the money in the world." Richard nodded. But as he pulled out of the driveway, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. He'd exposed the secret that had protected his father's peaceful, private life for nearly 3 decades. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the anger and hurt, Richard realized something else. He had no idea if the revelation would make things better or worse. But he was about to find out just how much the promise of money could change people, even people he thought he knew. The drive back to the apartment Richard shared with Tracy took 40 minutes. James insisted Richard drop him at his own place first. As the older man got out of the car, he paused. "Richard," he said, leaning back through the door. "Whatever happens next, remember this. The people who love you for who you are will still be there. The ones who only value what you have were never really there to begin with. Your mother taught me that. She loved me when I was a broke custodian, with nothing but dreams. That's the kind of love worth having." Richard watched his father walk into his modest building, disappearing through the security door. Then he drove home to face whatever came next. The apartment was dark when he arrived. Tracy wouldn't be home for hours, yet she'd have to stay at her parents' house, doing damage control, explaining or defending or apologizing. Richard didn't know which, and at that moment, he didn't care. He sat in the dark living room, replaying the evening in his mind. Every word, every expression, every moment of silence, from Tracy, when she should have spoken up. They had no idea what was coming, none of them did. Because Richard's revelation hadn't just exposed his father's wealth. It had exposed exactly who all of them really were. And that truth was worth far more than $800 million. Richard didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, checking his phone every few minutes. No calls, no texts from Tracy. Nothing until 3:47 a.m., when his phone finally buzzed. "Tracy, staying at my parents tonight. We need to talk. Tomorrow." That was it. No apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened. Just a cold, procedural message that made Richard's stomach twist. He finally dozed off around dawn and woke to his phone ringing at 8:15 a.m. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Richard Newman?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Speaking. This is Jennifer Walsh from the New York Financial Chronicle. I'm hoping to speak with you about your father, James Newman. We've received some interesting information about a significant early investment in..." Richard hung up immediately. His hands were shaking. How did the press already know? Then he remembered 30 people at that dinner party. 30 people who just learned that the poor old custodian was worth nearly $1 billion. Of course, someone had talked. His phone rang again. Different number. He didn't answer. Then, another call. And another. By 9 a.m., he'd received 17 calls from various media outlets and 3 voicemails from people claiming to be investment advisors who could help manage the family fortune. The family fortune. As if it belonged to Richard. As if his father's money was somehow his business to manage. He called James immediately. The phone rang 4 times before his father picked up, sounding groggy. "Dad, are you okay? Have you been getting calls?" "Oh yes. Started about an hour ago. I unplugged the landline and turned off my cell phone." Richard almost laughed. His father's life had just been turned upside down, his privacy shattered, and he was asking if Richard was all right. "I'm so sorry, Dad. This is my fault. I shouldn't have." "What's done is done," James said calmly. "We'll figure it out. I'm going to call Henry, you remember my lawyer, and see what we can do about the media attention. In the meantime, don't answer any calls from numbers you don't recognize." "Already learned that lesson," Richard said. "Dad, I really am sorry. I know you are. Come by for lunch later if you can. We'll talk properly." After they hung up, Richard sat in silence for a few minutes. Then his phone buzzed with a text. This time, it was from Tyler. "Tyler, hey man. I think we all got off on the wrong foot last night. Why don't you and your dad come by the house today? We'd love to apologize properly. Family should stick together, right?" Richard stared at the message in disbelief. Less than 12 hours ago, Tyler had been mocking James's finances and suggesting Richard abandon his father to focus on his own future. Now it was all family should stick together. He didn't respond. 3 more texts came in rapid succession. One from Patricia, full of effusive apologies and an invitation to brunch. One from Tracy's cousin Jennifer, whom Richard had met exactly twice, suddenly wanting to reconnect and catch up. And one from Tracy herself. "Tracy, Can you come to my parents' house at noon? Please. We really need to talk. All of us. Richard felt his jaw clench. All of us. A family meeting. Then, he could already imagine what it would be: the Harrisons trying to smooth everything over, pretending their behavior hadn't revealed exactly who they were, positioning themselves to benefit from James's wealth. He texted back, "I'll be at Dad's apartment at noon. If you want to talk, come there." The response was almost immediate. "Richard, please, my parents want to apologize. Can't we just— Dad's apartment, noon. That's my offer." He put his phone face down on the table and went to take a shower. When he emerged 20 minutes later, he had 7 new text messages and 4 missed calls. He ignored all of them. At 11:30 a.m., Richard drove to his father's apartment in Queens. The modest building looked the same as always, a simple 6-story structure built in the 1972, with a small lobby and slightly worn carpeting in the hallways. Richard had grown up here, in apartment 4B. His father still lived in the same 2-bedroom unit, with the same furniture, the same modest kitchen, the same everything. But today, something was different. There was a news van parked across the street. Richard swore under his breath and pulled into the underground parking garage instead. He took the back elevator up to the 4th floor and knocked on his father's door using their old signal: 2 quick knocks, pause, 3 more. James opened the door immediately, looking tired but composed. "They found me faster than I expected," he said, gesturing toward the window. "Channel 7 showed up an hour ago. Henry says they'll lose interest in a few days if we don't give them anything." "I'm sorry, Dad," Richard said again. "Stop apologizing," James said firmly. "Sit down. I made sandwiches." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. James's apartment was a time capsule: old family photos on the walls, Richard's childhood artwork still framed and displayed, his mother's favorite chair still positioned by the window. Everything worn but clean, simple but loved. "So," James finally said, "tell me what happened after you left last night." Richard filled him in on the calls, the texts, Tyler's sudden change in attitude. James listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. "They want access," James said when Richard finished. "Not to me, to what they think I represent. Money, opportunity, status. I know. It's disgusting. It's human nature," James corrected gently. "Not admirable human nature, but predictable. The question is, what are you going to do about Tracy?" Richard set down his sandwich. "I don't know, Dad. Part of me wants to believe she'll come around, that she'll see how wrong her family was. But she's been showing you who she is for a while now, hasn't she?" Richard nodded slowly. "Yeah, I just didn't want to see it. The comments about your apartment being depressing. The way she'd make excuses not to come to Sunday dinners. Last month, she suggested we start doing holidays with just her family, said it would be easier. I told myself she was just trying to balance everything. But she was ashamed." James finished quietly. "Of me. Of where you came from. Of the fact that your father wasn't wealthy and connected. The irony is killing me," Richard said with a bitter laugh. "She wanted me to come from money, and it turns out I do. Just not in the way she expected." Make sure you're subscribed to this channel if you have not, because the ending of this story will blow your mind. And drop a comment below telling me what you think Richard should do next. At 12:15 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Richard looked through the peephole and saw Tracy standing in the hallway, alone. She looked exhausted, her eyes red from crying, still wearing the same clothes from last night. Richard opened the door. Tracy stepped inside, saw James sitting at the kitchen table, and immediately burst into tears. "James, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I should have defended you. I should have said something. I was a coward. And I—" "Sit down, Tracy," James said gently, gesturing to a chair. She sat, wiping at her eyes. Richard remained standing, leaning against the counter with his arms crossed. "Where are your parents?" Richard asked. "I thought this was going to be a family meeting." Tracy looked down at her hands. "They wanted to come. I told them no. This conversation needs to be just us." "What conversation?" Richard asked. "The one where you apologize and expect everything to go back to normal? Where we pretend last night didn't happen?" "No," Tracy said quietly. "The one where I admit I've been a terrible wife and an even worse person." The apartment fell silent. Even James looked surprised. Tracy took a shaky breath. "I've been thinking all night. About everything you said. Everything my family did. Everything I didn't do. And you were right, Richard. About all of it. I was ashamed. Of your father's apartment, his clothes, his car. I was embarrassed to introduce him to my friends. I made excuses not to see him because I didn't want people asking questions about his circumstances." She looked up at James, tears streaming down her face. "And that makes me a horrible person, because you've never been anything but kind to me. You welcomed me into your family. You treated me like a daughter. And I repaid you by being embarrassed of you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway." James reached across the table and took her hand. "Tracy, I forgive you." "Of course I do." "Just like that?" She looked stunned. "Just like that," James confirmed. "We all make mistakes. What matters is whether we learn from them." Richard felt something twist in his chest. His father's capacity for grace never ceased to amaze him. But forgiveness wasn't the same as trust, and trust had to be earned. "What about your family?" Richard asked Tracy. "Because Dad might forgive you, but I watched your mother mock him for an hour straight. I watched your brother call him a financial burden, and I watched them try to convince me to abandon my own father so we could build wealth. Are you going to stand up to them now?" Tracy's face crumpled. "They're my parents, Richard." "And he's mine," Richard shot back. "So which side are you on?" "Why does it have to be sides?" Tracy's voice rose. "Why can't we all just move forward? My parents realize they were wrong. They want to apologize. Do they?" Richard interrupted. "Or do they want access to Dad's money? Because Tyler's text this morning was very interesting. Suddenly, we're family. Suddenly, they want to stick together. Where was that energy last night? People make mistakes when they're surprised. Don't make excuses for them, Tracy. That's what you've been doing our entire marriage. Making excuses, justifying their behavior, asking me to be understanding while they treat me and my father like we're beneath them. That's not fair, isn't it?" Richard's voice was cold now. 3 years, Tracy. 3 years of comments about my salary, my car, my neighborhood. 3 years of your mother suggesting you could do better. I let it slide because I loved you. Because I thought you were on my side. But you weren't. You were on their side. And the only reason you're here now, the only reason you're apologizing, is because you found out there's money involved. "That's not true," Tracy protested. But her voice lacked conviction. "Then prove it," Richard said. "Tell your family that Dad's money is his business, not theirs. Tell them that nothing changes, that we're not going to be taking luxury vacations or buying new cars or investing in Tyler's next development project. Tell them that Dad's privacy and dignity matter more than their sudden desire to be close to us." Tracy opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Richard, they're still my family. I can't just cut them off. I'm not asking you to cut them off. I'm asking you to establish boundaries, to put our marriage first, to defend my father when they inevitably start treating him like a POS ATM machine instead of a human being. They wouldn't. They already are. Richard pulled out his phone and showed her the texts. "Look, Tyler wants to reconnect. Your mother wants to have brunch. Your cousin Jennifer, who's never said more than hello to me, suddenly wants to catch up. This is what the next few months are going to look like, Tracy. Maybe years, people coming out of the woodwork. being nice for all the wrong reasons, seeing dollar signs instead of people. And I need to know that you're going to stand with me and Dad through it, not facilitate it." Tracy stared at the phone, her face pale. "Only if we let it," James said quietly. Both Richard and Tracy turned to look at him. "The money hasn't changed me in 27 years. It doesn't have to change any of us. But that requires something most people find very difficult. Saying no. Turning down opportunities that look good on paper, but compromise your values. Disappointing people who expect things from you. Watching relationships end because they were built on false foundations." He looked at Tracy directly. "I don't want your family's money. I don't need their connections. I don't require their approval. What I want is to continue living my life the way I have been, simply, quietly, on my own terms." Richard understands that. The question is, can you understand it? Can you accept a life that might not include the luxury vacations and designer handbags and country club memberships you grew up with? Tracy looked between James and Richard, her expression lost. "I don't know. I want to say yes, but I honestly don't know. I've never lived any other way." "Then maybe you need to figure that out," Richard said, his voice softer now but still firm. "Because I'm not going to watch my father get used by your family. I'm not going to stand by while they suddenly pretend to care about him because he's wealthy. And I'm not going to let them pressure him into investing in Tyler's projects or donating to your mother's charity galas or any of the 100 other ways they're going to try to access his money." "What are you saying?" Tracy's voice was small. "I'm saying maybe we need some time apart. For you to figure out what you really want. Who you really are. Separate from your family's expectations. You want a separation?" Tracy stood up abruptly. "Richard, no. Please. I know I messed up, but we can work through this." "Can we?" Richard asked. "Because I don't think you've really grasped what happened last night. This isn't just about you staying silent. It's about 3 years of watching you slowly become more like them. More focused on status and money and what people think. More embarrassed about where I came from. You used to love Sunday dinners with Dad. You used to say you admired his humility. When did that change?" Tracy was crying again, but Richard couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or fear of losing the life she'd built or the life she'd just discovered might be possible with access to James's wealth. "I need space to think," Richard said finally. "And you need space to figure out who you want to be. Independent of your family's influence. Independent of knowing about Dad's money." "How long?" Tracy whispered. "I don't know. A few weeks at least." "Where will you stay?" "I'll stay here," James interjected. "I have a spare bedroom. Richard can have his old room back for a while." Tracy looked devastated, but she nodded slowly. "Okay, if that's what you need." She stood to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, Richard, I do love you. I know I haven't shown it well lately, but I do. I believe you," Richard said. "But love isn't enough if we don't share the same values." After Tracy left, Richard sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. James got up and put a hand on his shoulder. "That was hard," James said. "Yeah. But necessary." "Yeah. You know what's coming next, don't you?" James asked. "The Harrisons aren't going to take this well. They're going to push. They're going to try to manipulate Tracy. Use her to get to us. They might even try to go around her entirely." Richard nodded. "I know. What should we do?" James was quiet for a moment. "We stand our ground, we protect our peace, and we see who people really are when they think there's something in it for them. It's not pleasant, son, but it's necessary. Better to know now than 5 years from now." The rest of the day was relatively quiet. Richard moved some clothes into his old room, which his father had kept exactly as Richard had left it when he moved out at 22. His old posters were still on the walls, his books still on the shelves. It felt like stepping back in time, except everything was different now. That evening, as they ate a simple dinner of pasta and salad, Richard's phone started buzzing with a new wave of messages. But these weren't from the Harrisons. They were from people Richard hadn't heard from in years. His old college roommate, suddenly wanting to reconnect. A distant cousin, asking if the rumors were true. A former coworker suggesting they grab drinks and catch up. "It's starting," Richard said, showing his father the messages. James nodded grimly. "It'll get worse before it gets better. People are going to come out of the woodwork. Some with good intentions, most with bad ones. You'll have to learn to tell the difference." "How do you tell the difference?" "Time," James said. "And boundaries. The people who really care about you will respect your boundaries. The others will push, manipulate, guilt trip. They'll make you feel like you owe them something. Because you have access to wealth they don't. Don't fall for it." Richard was about to respond when his phone rang. "Tracy." He hesitated, then answered. "Richard." Tracy's voice was tight, strained. "My parents want to talk to you and your father. Tomorrow morning. They're insisting." "No, Richard, please. They're really upset. My mom has been crying all day. They feel terrible about how they treated James. Then they can write him a letter," Richard said. "They don't get a face-to-face meeting where they can pressure him or try to justify their behavior. Or, let's be honest, position themselves for future favors. That's not what this is about, isn't it? Tracy, be honest with yourself. Why do your parents suddenly care so much about making things right? Why the urgency?" Silence on the other end. Then, very quietly, "Tyler wants to pitch your father on an investment opportunity. He thinks it would be a good way to rebuild bridges. Invest in the family business, become partners." There it was. Less than 24 hours after learning about James's wealth, and they were already planning how to access it. "Tell Tyler the answer is no," Richard said. "Tell all of them the answer is no. To everything. No investments, no partnerships, no loans, no donations. Dad's money is his own, and he's going to continue living exactly as he has been. They're not going to like that. I don't care if they like it, Tracy. And the fact that you're worried about their reaction, instead of seeing how insane this is, that tells me everything I need to know." He hung up before she could respond. James had been listening quietly. Now he spoke. "They're going to make this very difficult for both of you." "Let them," Richard said. "I'm done pretending their behavior is acceptable just to keep the peace." "Good," James said, "because what happens next is going to test every relationship you have. You're about to learn who your real friends are, who your real family is. It's going to hurt, but it's also going to set you free." Richard nodded. But deep inside, he felt something else building. Not just anger at the Harrisons' transparent opportunism. Not just hurt at Tracy's inability to stand up to her family, but something harder, more resolute. He was going to protect his father's peace and dignity, no matter what it cost him, even if it meant losing his marriage, even if it meant cutting off Tracy's entire family, even if it meant facing down every opportunist who came crawling out of the woodwork looking for a piece of the fortune. They had no idea what was coming. They thought this was about money, about access, about opportunity. But Richard was about to show them it was about something far more important: respect, boundaries, and the difference between family that loved you and family that used you. The war was just beginning, and Richard was ready to fight it. The next 2 weeks were brutal. Richard had underestimated just how aggressive the Harrisons would be. What he'd thought would be simple boundary setting turned into an all-out campaign to gain access to James's wealth. It started with Tyler showing up at James's apartment building unannounced, carrying a portfolio of investment opportunities. The doorman, an older man named George, who'd known James for decades, had called up first, and James had simply told him to turn Tyler away. Tyler had left his portfolio anyway, with a note about family investing in family. James had thrown it in the recycling without opening it. Then came Patricia's calls. She'd somehow gotten James's cell phone number and began calling multiple times a day, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. They ranged from tearful apologies to thinly veiled requests for guidance on her charity foundation's finances. James had blocked her number after the fifth call. But the real pressure came through Tracy. She'd text Richard every day, sometimes multiple times, with messages that grew progressively more manipulative. At first, it was pleas for reconciliation. "I miss you. Please come home. We can work this out." Then it shifted to guilt. "You're tearing our family apart over one bad night." Then bargaining. "What if we just had one dinner? Just to clear the air. Dad promises to behave." Richard hadn't responded to most of them. When he did, it was brief. "Not interested. No thanks." "Stop asking." It was the 11th day of their separation when things escalated. Richard was at work, trying to focus on a system integration project, when his phone rang. Tracy's number. He almost didn't answer, but something in his gut told him to pick up. "Richard." Tracy's voice was strange, tight, and controlled in a way that immediately put him on alert. "We need to talk. In person. Tonight. 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 Tonight." "Tracy, I told you. It's about your father," she interrupted. "And it's serious. Can you meet me at Riverside Cafe at 7? Richard felt his stomach drop. "What about my father? Is he okay?" "He's fine. But there's something you need to know. 7 o'clock. Please." She hung up before he could ask more questions. Richard immediately called James, who answered on the second ring and assured him everything was fine. "I'm sitting in my apartment reading the paper, son. Nothing's wrong. What's going on?" Richard explained about Tracy's call. James was quiet for a moment. "This feels like a setup. I know, but what if it's not? What if something's actually wrong? Then she would have told you on the phone," James pointed out. "Richard, I think they're planning something. Be careful tonight." Richard promised he would be, but the rest of the day dragged by with an uncomfortable knot in his stomach. At 6:55 p.m., Richard walked into Riverside Cafe, a mid-scale restaurant in downtown Manhattan. He spotted Tracy immediately. She was sitting at a corner table, but she wasn't alone. Tyler and Patricia sat with her, all three of them looking up as Richard approached. He stopped dead in his tracks. "You've got to be kidding me." "Richard, please sit down," Patricia said, her voice saccharine sweet. "We just want to talk. This is an ambush." "It's a conversation," Tyler said. "One we should have had 2 weeks ago, but you've been avoiding us." "Gee, I wonder why," Richard said sarcastically. He looked at Tracy. "This was your idea?" "They wanted to see you," Tracy said, not meeting his eyes. "I thought maybe if we all just talked." "No." Richard turned to leave. "If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what you would have done in Richard's situation." "Richard, wait." Patricia stood up quickly. "Please. 5 minutes. That's all we're asking." Something in her tone made Richard pause. He turned back slowly. 5 minutes. Then, I'm gone." He sat down, but didn't take off his coat. The message was clear. This wasn't a social visit. Tyler jumped in immediately. "All business. Look, I know we got off on the wrong foot at the party. Things were said in the heat of the moment, but we're family, and family forgives each other. So, let's move past it." "Move past it," Richard repeated flatly. "You mocked my father for an hour, implied he was a burden, and suggested I abandon him. And you want to move past it." "We didn't know," Patricia started. "Didn't know he was rich?" Richard finished. "Right. So, if he was actually poor, your behavior would have been fine? That's your defense?" Patricia flushed. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Finally, Tyler leaned forward. "Okay, fine. We were out of line. We apologize. Can we move on now? Because I have a business proposition that I think you and your father would be very interested in." And there it was. The real reason for this meeting. "Not interested," Richard said immediately. "You haven't even heard it yet," Tyler protested. "I'm developing a luxury condo complex in Tribeca, $20 million project. I need investors, and given your father's portfolio, My father's portfolio is none of your business. It would be a great opportunity for him to diversify his holdings while supporting family. Tyler continued as if Richard hadn't spoken. We're talking about potential returns of 30 to 40% over 5 years. That's serious money, even for someone at his level. The answer is no. Richard, be reasonable, Patricia interjected. Tyler is offering your father an incredible opportunity. The least you could do is bring it to him. My father doesn't need me to bring him anything. If he wanted to invest in real estate, he has his own advisors. He doesn't need Tyler's opportunities. This is different, Tyler insisted. This is family. And family invests in family. It's how generational wealth works. Richard laughed without humor. Generational wealth? Tyler, 2 weeks ago you were telling me to stop supporting my financial burden of a father so I could focus on building my own wealth. Now, you want him to invest in your projects so you can build your wealth. Do you hear yourself? Tyler's face darkened. That was before I knew the full picture. Exactly, Richard cut him off. Before you knew he was rich, he wasn't worth your time. Now that you know, suddenly he's family, and you want to help him diversify his holdings. It's transparent, Tyler. And it's pathetic. How dare you, Patricia hissed. We raised Tracy to be part of this family. We welcomed you with open arms. No, you didn't, Richard said coldly. You tolerated me. There's a difference. And you made it very clear that I wasn't good enough for your daughter because I didn't make enough money, and my father was a custodian. Well, guess what? He's still a custodian. The money didn't change who he is, but it sure as hell revealed who you are. Richard, please. Tracy finally spoke, her voice breaking. Can't we just try? One family dinner. Let your dad and my parents talk. Clear the air. Maybe he'll see that Tyler's project really is a good opportunity. Richard stared at his wife, really looked at her, and in that moment, he saw the calculation behind her eyes. The hope that this could all work out. That her family could access James's wealth while maintaining the fiction of reconciliation. You're in on this, Richard said quietly. You knew they were going to pitch an investment. Tracy's silence was answer enough. Unbelievable, Richard stood up. You arranged this whole meeting just so Tyler could make his pitch. The concerned phone call, the urgent meeting, the something you need to know, it was all manipulation to get me here. It's not manipulation if it's good for everyone, Tyler said. Your father gets a solid investment. I get funding for my project. And our families become partners. Everybody wins. Except, my father doesn't want to be your partner, Richard said. He doesn't want your investment opportunities. He doesn't want family dinners where you calculate how much you can extract from him. He doesn't want any of this, and neither do I. You're being selfish, Patricia said sharply. Family helps family. If your father has the resources, they're his to do with as he pleases, not yours, not Tyler's, not anyone's, but his own. We're not asking for a handout, Tyler said, his patience clearly wearing thin. We're offering a legitimate business opportunity. That he didn't ask for, doesn't want, and won't be taking. Is that clear enough for you? Tyler slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. This is ridiculous. Do you know how many people would kill for an opportunity like this? Your father is sitting on hundreds of millions of dollars, doing nothing with it. He's living his life, Richard interrupted. The life he chose. The life he's happy with. Just because he's not spending his money the way you think he should, doesn't mean he's doing it wrong. He's your father, Patricia said, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. You have influence over him. You could convince him. To do what? Invest in projects he's not interested in, just to make you happy? To change his entire lifestyle to meet your expectations? To become a different person because you've decided that's what wealthy people should do? Richard shook his head. No, absolutely not. And the fact that you think I should manipulate my own father for your benefit tells me everything I need to know about your character. Watch your tone, Tyler warned. You're talking to your wife's family. Wife, Richard repeated, looking at Tracy. That's an interesting word, because wives are supposed to support their husbands. They're supposed to have their backs. They're not supposed to set up ambush meetings where their families try to pressure their father-in-law into bad investments. It's not a bad investment, Tyler protested. It doesn't matter if it's the best investment in the world, Richard said firmly. It's unwanted. The answer is no. It will always be no. And if you keep pushing, the answer won't just be no, it'll be never contact us again. You can't threaten us, Patricia said indignantly. It's not a threat. It's a boundary. One you've repeatedly tried to violate. Richard looked at each of them in turn. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop calling my father. You're going to stop showing up at his apartment. You're going to stop sending investment portfolios and charity requests and dinner invitations that are really just opportunities to ask for money. You're going to leave him alone. And if we don't, Tyler challenged, then my father will take legal action. Harassment charges, restraining orders, whatever his lawyers recommend. He's been documenting everything. The calls, the visits, the messages. He has a case, and he'll use it if necessary. That got their attention. Patricia went pale. Tyler's jaw clenched. You wouldn't, Tracy whispered. Try me, Richard said. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Tracy? Don't bother coming by Dad's apartment to pick up your things. I'll have them packed and delivered to your parents' house tomorrow. I think it's time we made our separation official. Richard, no. Tracy stood up, reaching for him. You made your choice, Richard said. You chose them. Their approval, their money games, their manipulation. You chose all of that, over basic human decency and loyalty to the man I love most in the world. So yeah, I'm making a choice too. I'm choosing to protect my father's peace and dignity, even if it means losing you. He walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Behind him, he could hear Tracy crying, Patricia's sharp voice saying something he couldn't make out, and Tyler cursing under his breath. Richard's hands were shaking as he got into his car. He sat in the parking lot for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. He'd just effectively ended his marriage, in a public restaurant. With his in-laws watching, but beneath the shock and sadness, he felt something else. Relief. Clarity. The weight of 3 years of pretending, of making excuses, of watching his father be disrespected while he stayed silent, it was gone. He drove to James's apartment and told him everything. His father listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as the story unfolded. I'm sorry, son, James said when Richard finished. I know you loved her. I did, Richard said. But I loved the person I thought she was, not who she actually is. There's a difference. Yes, there is. James was quiet for a moment. You know what happens now, don't you? They're going to escalate. This isn't over. James was right. Over the next week, the Harrisons launched what could only be described as a campaign. First came the guilt trip through mutual friends. People Richard and Tracy knew socially started reaching out, saying how sad Tracy was, how the family just wanted to reconcile, how Richard was being unreasonable. Most of these people didn't know the full story. They'd only heard the Harrison version, where they were the victims of Richard's sudden coldness. Then came the social media posts. Patricia started posting on Facebook about the importance of family and forgiveness and not letting money tear people apart. The subtext was clear. Richard and James were the bad guys, hoarding wealth and refusing to share with family who just wanted to help. Then Tyler tried a different approach. He had his lawyer send a letter to James, suggesting that by publicly revealing his wealth at the party, James had created a verbal contract to consider Tyler's investment opportunities. It was a ridiculous legal argument, and James's lawyer responded with a cease and desist letter that made it very clear any further contact would result in harassment charges. But the nuclear option came 2 weeks later. Richard was at work when he got a call from an unfamiliar number. Against his better judgment, he answered. Mr. Newman? This is Detective Rodriguez with the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I need to ask you some questions about your father, James Newman. Richard's blood ran cold. What? Why? We've received a report suggesting possible tax evasion and financial fraud related to undeclared assets. Can you come down to the station this afternoon? It took Richard 3 hours, a lawyer, and a very uncomfortable conversation to sort out what had happened. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint with the IRS and the NYPD, claiming that James had been hiding assets for years and hadn't paid proper taxes on his wealth. The complaint was complete fiction. James's taxes were immaculate, handled by a top accounting firm, with every dollar properly reported and documented. But it had triggered an investigation that would take weeks to fully resolve, causing stress, inconvenience, and requiring James to produce decades of financial records. The detective was apologetic when everything checked out. "I'm sorry for the hassle, Mr. Newman. It appears someone filed a malicious complaint. If you want to pursue charges against whoever did this, we can try to track down the source." "Do that," Richard said immediately. "I want to know who filed it." It took another week, but the answer came back. The complaint had been filed by someone using a burner phone and a fake name. But the IP address traced back to Tyler Harrison's office. Richard showed the detective's report to James, who read it with a tired expression. "They tried to sick the government on me," James said quietly, "because I wouldn't invest in Tyler's project." "This is beyond unacceptable," Richard said, his voice shaking with rage. "This is criminal. We need to press charges." "No," James said. "What? Dad, I know what they did," James interrupted. "And I know what you want to do. But think about it, Richard. If we press charges, this becomes a legal battle. Years in court, media attention, stress and anger, and endless conflict. Is that really how you want to spend your time and energy? They don't deserve to get away with this." "They won't," James said calmly. "But revenge isn't justice, and justice isn't always what it looks like in movies. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and letting people destroy themselves." Richard wanted to argue, but something in his father's expression stopped him. "What are you thinking?" Richard asked. James smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "I'm thinking that Tyler Harrison is about to learn a very expensive lesson about consequences." Over the next month, Richard watched his father execute a masterclass in quiet, strategic action. First, James's lawyers sent a comprehensive legal package to the Harrison family, not pressing criminal charges, but making it abundantly clear that any further contact, any further harassment, any further false reports would result in immediate legal action. The letter detailed every violation, every documented incident, with timestamps and evidence. It was essentially a legal warning shot that said, "Back off," or "face consequences." Second, James made some phone calls, quiet calls, to people in industries where the Harrison family operated. He didn't badmouth them. He simply let it be known, through his network of wealthy, connected individuals that he'd been quietly part of for decades, that the Harrisons had a tendency toward aggressive financial opportunism and couldn't be trusted to respect boundaries. In the tight-knit world of high-net-worth individuals, reputation was everything. Word spread quickly. Within 3 weeks, Tyler lost 2 major investors for his Tribeca project. Both had heard concerns about his business practices and backed out. The project stalled, putting Tyler's company in a difficult financial position. Patricia's charity foundation, which had been courting several wealthy donors, suddenly found their funding dried up. People who had previously been interested were now mysteriously unavailable. And Tracy found herself in an impossible position. Her family was crumbling financially and socially, and they blamed Richard and James for it. But Tracy had also started to see, perhaps for the first time, exactly what her family was capable of when they didn't get their way. She called Richard one evening, 6 weeks after the restaurant ambush. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice small. "Just you and me. I promise. No ambush. No family. Just us." Richard agreed to meet her at a neutral location, a coffee shop neither of them had been to before. When he arrived, Tracy looked different, thinner, with dark circles under her eyes, wearing a simple sweater instead of her usual designer clothes. They sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment before Tracy spoke. "Tyler filed the false police report," she said without preamble. "I didn't know he was going to do it. I swear I didn't. But when I found out—" She stopped, wiping at her eyes. "When I found out, I confronted him. And he said it was justified because your father was being unreasonable and needed to be taught a lesson." Richard said nothing, just waited. "That's when I realized," Tracy continued. "This isn't about reconciliation. It never was. They see your father as a resource, a means to an end, and they're willing to destroy him, destroy us, to get what they want." She looked up at Richard, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry. You were right about everything. I should have seen it sooner. I should have stood up to them from the beginning." "Yes," Richard said simply. "You should have." "Is there?" Tracy's voice broke. "Is there any chance you can forgive me? Any chance we can start over?" Richard looked at the woman he'd married 3 years ago. He tried to find the person he'd fallen in love with, the smart, funny woman who'd once told him that money didn't matter, that love was all they needed. But that woman was gone. Or maybe she'd never really existed. "I forgive you," Richard said, and he meant it. "But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. We can't start over, Tracy. Too much has happened. Too many choices that revealed our core values are incompatible. We could try therapy." "No," Richard said gently but firmly. "Because this isn't about communication. It's about character. When things got hard, when you had to choose between your family's approval and basic human decency, you chose approval. Every single time. That's who you are. And I need to be with someone who would have chosen differently." Tracy sobbed openly now. "I love you. I know you do. But love isn't enough if we don't share the same values. Dad taught me that." They talked for another hour. It wasn't angry or bitter, just sad. Two people acknowledging that their marriage had been built on a foundation that couldn't support the weight of reality. By the end, they'd agreed on a divorce. It would be amicable, handled by lawyers, with a clean split of their modest assets. As Richard drove back to his father's apartment that night, he felt something unexpected. Peace. Not happiness, exactly, but the quiet contentment of knowing he'd done the right thing, even when it was hard. James was waiting up for him when he got home. "How'd it go?" James asked. "We're getting divorced," Richard said. "It's over." James nodded slowly. "Honestly?" Relieved. "For what?" "For teaching me that integrity matters more than comfort. That some things aren't negotiable, even when the cost is high. That living according to your values is worth losing people who don't share them." James smiled and put his hand on Richard's shoulder. "You would have figured it out eventually. I just gave you a front row seat to watch what happens when people discover money is involved." "Tyler's project fell apart," Richard said. "I heard through the grapevine. He can't get funding." "Yes," James said simply. "Did you?" "I made some phone calls, shared some concerns with people who asked. I didn't lie. I didn't exaggerate. I simply told the truth about what happened when the Harrisons learned about my wealth. People drew their own conclusions. That's not quite the same as pressing charges, but it's definitely justice," Richard observed. "Sometimes the best justice is natural consequences," James said. "Tyler's reputation is suffering because of his own actions, not mine. I just made sure the right people knew what those actions were." 6 months later, Richard's divorce was finalized. He'd moved into his own apartment in Queens, not far from his father. It was modest, but comfortable, and for the first time in years, Richard felt like himself again. He'd learned something profound through the whole ordeal. That knowing someone had money changed them less than revealing money changed everyone around them. His father was still the same humble, wise man he'd always been, But the Harrisons had revealed themselves to be exactly what James had always quietly suspected: people for whom wealth was the ultimate measure of worth. Tyler's company eventually went under, unable to recover from the reputational damage and lost investors. Patricia's charity foundation folded, and Tracy had last Richard heard, moved to Chicago to start over, away from her family's influence. As for Richard, he'd been promoted at work. He'd started dating again a teacher named Emily, who thought his father's story was the coolest thing ever, and immediately understood why James chose to live simply. And every Sunday, without fail, he had dinner with his father in that small apartment in Queens, eating simple food and talking about everything and nothing. One Sunday evening, about a year after the fateful party, James brought up something he'd been thinking about. "I've decided to set up a foundation," he said, "for underprivileged students. Full scholarships, tuition, room and board, books, everything. I want to help kids who come from nothing get the education they need to build something." "That's amazing, Dad," Richard said. "I want you to help me run it," James continued. "Not now, maybe in a few years, when you're ready." Richard felt tears prick his eyes. "I'd be honored." "Good," James said, "because at the end of the day, that's what this was all about. Not protecting money, not punishing the Harrisons, but understanding what really matters. Family that loves you for who you are. Work that fulfills you. Using your resources to make the world a little better. Everything else is just noise." Richard raised his glass of water. "To what really matters." James clinked his glass against Richard's. "To what really matters." And in that moment, in that small apartment, with its worn furniture and faded photographs, Richard understood something his father had known all along. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in peace, in integrity, in relationships built on genuine connection rather than opportunism. The Harrisons had seen $800 million and thought they'd found treasure. What they'd actually found was a mirror, one that reflected exactly who they were when they thought there was something to gain. And in losing his wife, his in-laws, and the life he'd built, Richard had found something far more valuable: himself. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.